back to Moss Pilgo Props and Happy New Year. Today I'll be covering a couple of different props that I've been working on since the Christmas holiday. One is the EE-3, the Boba Fett rifle. I did some weathering on it and I purchased it off of eBay. The other one is Bumble and Carbonite, which the idea came across from Sean Cash from Try to Finish Something and Kelly Stern from Props and Villainy. Sean had done Baby Yoda or Grogu and Carbonite, and Kelly had done the Quacky and Monkey in Carbonite, so I figured I'd put my own spin on it. Bumble, if you're not familiar, he came from Rudolph, the Red-Nosed Reindeer. He had been in a couple of different animations from the 60s and 70s, and he's been sitting around since Christmas passed, and I finally dug him out of a closet and decided that, well, let me go ahead and put him in Carbonite. It's just a combination of plaster and spray paint. I used some brown camouflage paint, or it's like a real dark brown, dark earth. And I went ahead and hot glued as far as where his mouth was at, kind of give it that molten metal look to it. And then I added some greeblies. One is in an old OtterBox case, and a lid from a paint can that was from a gloss or like a sealer, and a heat sink from an old router. So I hope you enjoy this episode. I look forward to doing more builds in the future. And again, Happy New Year. Today I'm going to do some weathering on this. It's actually hard rubber. It's a Boba Fett EE-3 carbine that I got off of eBay from a seller called Sci-Fi Man 123. It's actually got some pretty good stuff. It's, again, solid rubber. I added a cheap Tasco scope to it. It didn't come with a scope. I'm going to do some basic weathering. I'm going to hit the wood portion here where it's supposed to be faux wood. I'm going to make that look a little bit more like wood. I'm going to metallize these greeblies on the stock, and then I'm also going to do some weathering on the grips and on the edges, the fins, and see how this whole thing turns out. Working on a Boba Fett or a Boba Fresh build, so let's go into some weathering. On the barrel of the EE-3, I used a combination of pewter and bright silver rub and buff. I started with the fins and decided to cover the entire barrel as it is currently on the Book of Boba Fett. At the tip of the barrel, I used ebony rub and buff to give it that just fired look. I also made a point of hitting the high points on the edges of the rest of the rifle to make sure that it had that worn look as well. And let's not forget the greeblies on the stock. Those were also hit with bright silver and pewter rub and buff, and accented with ebony. The other project that I worked on over the holidays was my Hyperfuel Fusion chamber for my dropship bench. I wanted to add it to the bench as it gave a not quite disassembled look and was still part of an engine. I used an aircraft anti-collision light as my base for the fusion chamber. I disassembled it, and I went ahead and initially added RGB lighting and decided I didn't quite like it. I switched that over to that fire effect light that I've used in other builds, and it gave it a little bit more animation. I think the fire effect light worked much better than the RGB. Let me know in the comments what you think. And then we have Bumble from Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, who I encased in Carbonite. For most, you'll know that he was the nemesis for Yukon Cornelius, and for us, he'll just be a Wampa from Hoth in The Empire Strikes Back. I cut a frame that outlined him in MDF plywood. After, I hot glued him into place and then used a thin layer of plaster to give it a textured effect like Carbonite. Once the plaster was dry, I spray painted the entire thing with brown camouflage Rust-Oleum. Then I hit the high points with bright silver and pewter rub and buff. I made the greeblies out of an old broken Pelican case cover and the keys from an old laptop. The top light is a lid made from a spray paint can, and I added an LED light behind it. And the last project I worked on over the holidays was the blue milk barrel. The products I used in this build was Rust-Oleum Shell White and Rust-Oleum Milk Paint, which was in Highland Blue. Imagine that. Blue milk. I sanded down the entire surface of the barrel with 200 grit sandpaper. From there, I went ahead and shot it in the Shell White to give it a base coat. 2 coats were put on during the process. After the white paint dried, I applied the Highland Blue milk paint. This was applied to give the effect of a leaking blue milk container. I let it sit out overnight as the forecast said light rain, and I figured I'd let Mother Nature do a bit of the work for me to give it that natural leaking look of the container. Thanks for watching Moss Pelgo Props. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and if there's something you liked in the video, please leave a comment.